President-elect Joe Biden's pick for Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is set to take the post at a turbulent time for the U.S. economy. Millions of people pushed out of their jobs by the pandemic, and low earners, women, and people of color among those taking the biggest hits, even as the stock market has roared back. Renita just mentioned Dow at 30,000. Joining us now to give us more insight into a potential Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is Dana Peterson, chief economist at the Conference Board. Dana, it's great to speak with you. And I want to start with this idea that Yellen has been out front when it comes to identifying how the lower income population and minorities did not reap the full benefits of the growing economy after the Great Recession. When she was Federal Reserve Chair, she was kind of limited in her capability of what she could do to address that. How much do you think that changes as she becomes Treasury Secretary?
Well, first off, choosing Yellen is a great pick, a really smart pick. She's great for Wall Street, Main Street, and also K Street. And certainly her focus on folks who are not in the mainstream is going to be very important as Treasury pick. Certainly, she'll have a lot of influence in terms of convincing Congress to introduce further fiscal stimulus. She'll also have a lot of regulatory power, especially over the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where she can work to help persons of color and also women and people who find themselves on the extremes have greater access to banking and less pain in terms of predatory lending.
So that specific area is where she can really press her advantage in pushing for more attention and more focus on what women and minorities how they should be treated. What about in her capacity as Treasury Secretary when it comes to stimulus?
Sure, absolutely. She's going to be the key person negotiating with Congress from the upcoming administration in terms of making sure that there is another bill, and certainly what size and what the focus of that bill is going to be. And indeed, she has plenty of experience as former Fed chair in terms of speaking to Congress and helping them to understand, and also speaking to the public and helping everyone to understand the importance of additional supports. Indeed, I know there are some concerns, just given her directorship work, that she might be somewhat hawkish when it comes to federal government deficits and enlarging larger federal debt as a share of GDP. But she has indicated that she believes that more stimulus is warranted at this time. And so her voice is really going to carry a lot of weight.
And of course, it's not just racial or gender equality issues that she's going to be looking at. The new administration has made very clear that it's very focused on climate change and how that affects the poor more severely than other populations. How much purview would she have over that as Treasury Secretary?
Well, again, she can have a great influence over Congress, and I think also a lot of influence over the financial sector. And certainly, I think some key areas where she's going to have that influence is whether or not some of the facilities that are about to expire under the current administration, some of the Fed facilities and government Treasury credit and liquidity facilities, whether or not they'll be revived. And certainly, again, with her regulatory power in terms of making sure that insurers and banks are treating people fairly who may find them subject to climate change and be the most negatively affected by the outcome of climate change.
I want to go back to her experience, of course, as the Fed chair, because the Federal Reserve is a very academic institution. They have these important but ultimately nerdy debates over 2% inflation, slack in the labor market in order to meet their dual mandate of controlling inflation and full employment. Is she ready to duke it out with Congress, with Republicans, over convincing them to open up their wallet?
I definitely think she is. Again, as Fed chair, she had a number of hearings and testimonies that were just grueling, and she managed to, completely shine amid all of them. And I think that having someone in the Treasury who understands the work of the Fed will be very important. Indeed, supporting the Fed in its effort to maintain accommodation. And notably, the Fed has adopted this average inflation targeting gauge in terms of policy. And that means the Fed's going to be a lot more patient when it comes to inflation. That also means that the unemployment rate for all people of different demographics will fall further. So I think, if we have someone who understands the work that the Fed's doing and understands how fiscal policy can come along to support the Fed, then that's really going to be fantastic.
And finally, Dana, racism, as you've written about, imposes a big societal cost. And you've actually tallied up the cost of racism on the U.S. economy. You parsed through a ton of data. You put a dollar value on it, and it comes out to $16 trillion. This is something, as we mentioned, the administration is really focused on. What do you think would be some of the easiest fixes for the incoming Biden administration to do to close the gap between black and white households?
Sure. Well, the largest portion of that $16 trillion figure is $13 trillion, and that's from lost revenue for businesses, Black-owned businesses, that either don't have access to credit or capital, or whenever they do gain access to credit and capital, it's insufficient to meet their needs. So certainly, as treasurer, and again, as the major influencer of regulation for the financial sector, Yellen can play a large role in making sure that banks are lending fairly and that financial markets are providing capital for Black-owned businesses and businesses of all stripes.
Dana Peterson, fantastic to get your take. Dana is chief economist for the Conference Board. Thank you.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quicktake now for insight in an instant.